Well, good afternoon, and I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving break, and happy holiday season to you as we officially begin that part of it. Thanks for taking the time to scurry across the campus in your warm weather gear. It certainly got cold quickly, although we're told by the weatherman it's supposed to get back into the 50s next week, so we'll see how accurate that forecast is. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our distinguished lecture series. I'd like to welcome our PNNL staff, DOE staff, and those who are participating online through social media and other means. We're very happy to have you all here. My name is Steve Ashby. I'm the laboratory director. We created this lecture series with the goals of intellectually and professionally enriching our staff by exposing them to novel ideas, as well as hosting leading experts who can gain firsthand knowledge and exposure to some of the great work that's happening here at the laboratory, and to really get that exchange of information, of ideas going with our colleagues across the S&T community. Today I'm pleased to introduce Dr. John Doyle, one of the world's leading systems theorists from the California Institute of Technology, as his t-shirt proudly proclaimed earlier, but you seem to have abandoned it. All right. Professor Doyle's current research interests are in theoretical foundations for complex networks in engineering, biology, and multi-scale physics. The principles behind this are relevant to large-scale distributed systems such as the smart grid, the internet, and human sensorimotor systems. Dr. Doyle's research area of complex networks is a great fit with our own science vision, which is focused on understanding, predicting, and controlling the behavior of complex adaptive systems. Dr. Doyle is the John Lou Chameau Professor of Control and Dynamical Systems, Electrical Engineering and Bioengineering in the Division of Engineering and Applied Science at Caltech. He has bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a PhD in math from UC Berkeley. In addition to his theoretical research, he has developed a control analysis tool and software for high-performance commercial and military aerospace systems and other industrial systems. He has co-developed software toolboxes that are used at more than 1,000 sites worldwide. Dr. Doyle's achievements extend beyond science and engineering. He holds world records in various sports, including cycling, as we were just talking about, and I'm sure that if we have a chance, he'll tell us more about that a little bit later as well. He is a true Renaissance man with multiple interests. It's his first time here at the laboratory. He has been visiting today with a number of people around the lab in different groups, and he'll be visiting for a short time tomorrow as well. He's already had several discussions with people on our work in biology, chemistry, and the grid, as well as urban science research in collaboration with the University of Washington. And he'll wrap up his visit with us tomorrow morning with discussions about the Control of Complex Systems Initiative, as well as some work related to our cybersecurity research. He's also taking time to visit with some of our early career staff and meeting with many others on a variety of topics. We're very pleased to have him spend so much time with us. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. John Doyle, who is presenting an intriguingly titled talk on universal laws and architectures, theory and lessons from brains, nets, hearts, bugs, grids, flows, and zombies. Dr. Doyle.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks for coming. I'm having a lot of fun here today, except for the weather. I'm a total wimp when it comes to cold. So anyway, I got this incredibly pretentious title. But what this really is, this is just a trailer for my videos. So I have online, if you go to my website, it's actually kind of a mess. It's just a bunch of Dropbox folders, but I've got about 8 hours of videos. And so I managed to cut this all down to about an hour and a half, but apparently I only have an hour, so I have to go fast. But like any trailer, you're not supposed to understand it. You're just supposed to want to go see the video, so hopefully. So what I'm interested in is these major transitions. And at the top this is software-defined networking, Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, cyber physical systems, all these three-letter acronyms. So what this is, it's about it's evolution, but it's also changes in architecture, growth in complexity, and networks. And those are the four most or least well understood subjects in all of science. And so our heroes are from the last 2 centuries. And I would say we haven't followed their legacy very well, and we want to try to fix that. And so what we have is we have these sort of fragmented pieces of theories that have been successful in a narrow sense, but we really need to bring them together if we're going to ever have a coherent theory here. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's what I'm going to try to give you a feel for. Mostly I'm going to try to get you to understand the questions I'm asking because they're different enough. And we'll see at the end, if we have a little time, to talk a little bit about what math results from that. And so if we can get that theory, then there's all these case studies we want to do. And in the videos, there's the ones that I've highlighted in particular where we have an hour or two for each one. I'll only briefly talk about them today. So how do I approach this? Well, two things I try to do is I'm a mathematician, so I'm always trying to prove theorems, but also I'm trying to do it in the context of concrete case studies, and these are the case studies I'm interested in. Now, it looks like I work on a huge number of things, but I only work on their intersections, so the more there are, the less I have to work on. Critics would say I've already reached the empty set, which, of course, being from California, you're always seeking emptiness. But so we're going to start out with brains. And so the reason I'm focusing on brains is one of the things I like about it, well, everybody's interested in brains. And so often it's said that the brain is the most complex system. And I don't know about that. It's certainly the most narcissistic and self-absorbed organ we know. It's maybe the second most. But we can do live demos. And so one of the things that I'm going to do is we're going to look at some trade-offs. So this is a very simple trade-off in evolution. And I'm not saying cyclists are the most evolved, they're just the most fragile. So what do I mean by this quantitatively? So we'd like to be in the lower left-hand corner, but only fictional characters are. And when we try to build robots, they're usually up here somewhere. So we want to be both robust and efficient. What do I mean by this exactly? Well, if we compare ourselves with chimps, we're about 4 times as efficient as chimps are at distance running. We're slower, we're weaker, and everything else, but we're 4 times more efficient. At a bike, you get another 2x. But we're also vastly more fragile than they are in almost every way. And if you add a bike, you're even more fragile. So the crashes are worse. And they're more easily happened on a bike. So you have this trade-off between robustness and efficiency. And that's a really important starting point. So, and how do we overcome that? Well, we have balance. As I'm walking around here, I don't have to think about the fact that I'm balancing to stay upright. So we'd like to investigate this. So what's involved in this trade-off? What are the fundamentals? Is there a law here? Is there some real principles here? The problem is we can't get IRB approval to crash bicycles. So we have to find something simpler. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. So we're going to do something, that's why I have this. We're going to balance a stick. And instead of efficient, we're going to just consider the length to be the cost. Okay? And so this is with my students. So we're going to look at it as a simplified, we're going to study this process, which is a surrogate for what I'm doing here. And we'll see it's not a very good one, but it's not bad. The math is the same. So very simple math models. This is all just standard stuff. And so I'm not going to spend much time on it. The important thing is it's an unstable system. If I don't actively control it, it falls over. And the instability scales like the square root of g over L, where g is gravity and L is length. And so as I make it shorter, it's faster. Right? Watch how, and pretty soon it's much faster. And, right? Whereas if it's up here, it's slow. Okay? So what does that cause? So now we're interested in the control system that I am using when I do this. So I'm stabilizing it now. I'm using vision, and then I'm moving my hand back and forth to stabilize it, right? And I can stabilize it pretty well. As I make it shorter, it gets harder, and eventually it fails. Why? Why is this instability a problem? It's because of delay. And so what we're going to look at is we're going to imagine that the visual system is a little noisy. It actually isn't. We'll come back to that. But we can think of it as noisy for now. It's not a bad first approximation. And so I get some, you notice that out here, even when I'm stabilizing it, there's some error. It's not perfect. And it gets worse as it gets shorter. So I can get not much motion here, but if I make it short, there's a lot of motion. Why is that? I want to explain all of that, okay? So we look at the transfer function from this noise to the error. And we've got a delay here of about 300 milliseconds. So what So what's going on? Well, it turns out there's a theorem, and I'll show you the proof. We won't go through it, but the proof is very short. What it says is almost no matter how you measure this amplification process, where you think about entropy or energy, you get an amplification factor that's at least as bad as the exponential of p tau, where p is the pole, square root of g over L, and tau is the delay. So what that means is that, and this is necessary, I don't have to know anything else about the control system. I just need to know what this delay is and what this instability is, and I have a theorem that says no matter how I do, I'm going to have this much amplification. So the intuition is, if I'm unstable, I'm blowing up like e to the pt, by a delay of tau, which is all the time before I can react, whatever is going on will have blown up by that much. And so however I measure things, I've got to see a term like that. And that's roughly what it is. Now the proof, that's the whole proof. I'm not going to go through it. But if you know Max modulus theorem from complex variables, that's the whole proof. So it's not hard to prove that. Now that I'm interested in talking to biologists and neuroscientists, they at this point go, why are you bringing in complex variables all of a sudden? Well, because it's easy to prove it if I have it. But so now, at the end, you'll see that we now can get rid of the complex variables. We have a way of proving it with not just undergrad math, but high school math. So there's a proof of this, essentially, that uses high school math. OK, so here's the idea. We can plot this amplification factor as a function of length. And it's exponentially getting bigger. So what it says is that between 0.1 or 0.2 meters, the amplification factor is so big that I don't need to know how good your eyes are. And I don't need to know how fast you're not going to be able to do it. So if we went around the room, each one of you would be able to do it at some length. But when it gets short enough, no one can do it. And so this is a very simple theorem that explains the phenomena we see. And so basically, this is really a law that says you can't go into that region. You can't have it short and be robust. And so the theory and the data both give you the same story. And so it's quite robust to the noise model. We could have pretty much anything here. So there are really 4 laws here. We use mechanics and gravity it's Newtonian mechanics. It's actually just a Galilean gravity, right? We needed light and vision in order to understand how that worked, but we need this 4th law. And if you don't know law number 4, you're as bad off as if you didn't know gravity. So if you didn't know gravity was involved, you'd be pretty confused by why it kept falling over, right? But if you don't know this law 4, you don't understand why it oscillates when I get to this end. And you get all this mystical stuff about edge of chaos and stuff like that. And so I claim you need to know law 4. And law 4 is more important for biology than gravity. A lot of organisms most bacteria don't care about gravity. But they all care about that law. So this is a very important law. So I would say this is basically as important as any of these. And again, it's necessary. It doesn't depend on how the control is implemented. So it's quite universal. So when I say universal laws, this is, again, probably more universal than gravity. Now here's an interesting case, which is what I did to make it harder was I made it shorter, right? I went from harder. But what if I make it longer, but still look at a low point? So here's what I mean, is that, so this is easy. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it longer, but I'm going to look at this shorter point, right? So what's going to happen? Is that going to be easier? Is this easier or harder than this one? What do you think? Okay, well, I'm a mathematician, right? Why would I do an experiment when I can do the math? So I do the math. I plug this in. Proof doesn't change much. Way harder. So what am I doing here? I'm plotting. Here I'm changing the length. Here I'm keeping the length the same, and I'm moving down where I look. Infinitely harder, right? Okay, so we'll go ahead and do the experiment. But we shouldn't have to do the experiment. Okay, so I'm going to look here, and it's going to be impossible. Oh, whoops. Okay, so the experiment didn't work. Okay. So which is wrong? Is it the theory that's wrong or the experiment that's wrong? I'm a theorist, so the experiment's got to be wrong. So what's wrong with the experiment? I'm doing the experiment wrong. Yeah, I got to cut off the peripheral vision. Completely, it's impossible. So the theorem's true. And now the experiment's right. So, okay. But anyway, it's again, it's straightforward. But the point is, where you look matters, right? Okay. So you have an unstable pole, and this is what's called an unstable zero. And this is just as important as this, but it's easier to get rid of. Just look up, right? So that's the hardest of all. Now we could also look at changing the delay. So we could go from fast to slow, and things get hard as well. Notice I've moved to a log plot here because the numbers are so big. So, but we can't, it's not easy to manipulate delay here. The way you'd manipulate delay here is you'd lower the lights, and then that adds delay to my visual system, and we could see what that would be. But let's not bother. Okay, so what are we robust to? Very little. So if we're in the down position, we're quite robust. Yeah, it's easy. But it turns out you can change the mass by orders of magnitude. In fact, you can make this thing so heavy that you can't hold it up. You know, it's like, I've tried it. You know, I've got up to like 20 kilos or something. And at 20 kilos, it's no problem to balance, but you can't hold it, bench. So it's harder to just hold the thing. Balance is no problem. You can go down to, we've tried down to about 1 gram. So robust mass doesn't matter at all. You can look at all sorts. It's fragile, a whole bunch of things. You know, stand on one leg. I'm only told about this one. Anyway, lots of fragility. And the theory explains all of this, more or less. Okay, so we get this pretty nice picture of all this. Let's look at the delay a little bit more. What's going on? Okay. So we're going to do another experiment. This time we're going to use you as the subject. So we want to look into this delay issue a little bit more. So this is an example of a fundamental law. And there's a whole lot of these. And we'll talk about a few more of them later. But what I want to do is I want to switch to another thing, which is we're going to look at another live demo. So what you're going to do is don't do this, but just listen to me, and then I'll do the experiment. So put your hand in front of your face so that you can see the lines in your palm. And then you move your hand until it starts to blur, like this. And then you hold the hand steady, and you shake your head until it blurs. And the question is, which can you do faster before it blurs? What do you think? Hand or head? Try it. It's a huge difference. I don't know about you, but I blur really quick. Like, that blurs. Whereas I can't shake my head fast enough to make it blur. Right? Well, why is that? And this is a clue to a whole bunch of things. Well, so when you're doing your hand, you're using vision. And vision is slow. It's got this 300 millisecond delay in it. But it's super flexible. So now on this axis, we have flexibility and accuracy. So your visual system is very accurate. It's very flexible. You're reading a PowerPoint slide with your vision system. It wasn't evolved to do that, right? It's very flexible. But for your head motion, you have this completely separate system that doesn't use vision at all. It's like a bunch of rate gyros in your head. It directly wires to your eye. It's very fast, but it's not very flexible. It's not very accurate. You can test that by standing on one leg with your eyes closed, and there's all sorts of ways of doing that. But the point is, this is a very specialized system, but it's very fast. So you got this trade-off now. You got this mechanism that we're now a little bit of a diagram into, and then you've got this trade-off. And this is what we're after. We're interested in understanding what the trade-offs are and what the mechanisms that lead to that. Why do we need this? Well, we need high-resolution vision with respect to two kinds of motion, object motion and our own motion. Object motion is slow, relatively speaking. You're tracking something, but as you're doing it, you have to be moving around, your self-motion. So you have to have a much more robust, fast system for the self-motion, but it doesn't have to be as high resolution. And so that's the situation we've got into that leads to this. Okay. And so it's not just us. Any predator has to have this combination of fast reflexes and careful planning and high resolution. And it isn't just predation that needs this, and it isn't just vision. I mean, it's all sorts of things that has these kind of trade-offs. So the trade-offs here are this is sort of, again, ideally you'd be fast and flexible. You can't be, and we want to understand this a little more deeply. So what's the theorem analogous to this that tells us about these kind of trade-offs? And this is the laws, again, or what can we build? But what architecture is, now I want to bring architecture into the picture. Architecture is what allows you to build what's possible. Just because you can build parts like that doesn't mean you will, and it doesn't mean you'll put them together in a way that gets them to work, even though you can't be in the corner. But another thing an architecture does is it tunes things so that you create, in some sense, the illusion that you're in this corner. So what does this mean? Well, it means that even though there's no part that's here, the system as a whole functions as if it were here. It looks like it violates the law. We have to make sense of that. We see that in computer memories, right? We look at computer memories. 11 orders of magnitude in the sizes of computer memories, 8 orders of magnitude in speed, right? Huge, huge, huge variance, right? But what you do is you build this virtual system, virtual memory system, that gives you the illusion that it's fast and cheap and big, right? But it isn't. It's all, there's no part that's fast and big and cheap. So that's what a good architecture allows. Is that a contradiction? Well, not really. It's designed for a specific environment. So in this specific environment, it's tuned to be that. But we just did an experiment where it fails. Of course, there's no evolutionary pressure to be able to do that, right? You have to be able to see things far enough away. Okay. So these are the issues we're always faced with. So we've got this highly evolved hidden architecture, and then this illusion that we have to make sense of. And so we're always faced with this problem. Okay. So the summary so far is we've got this little picture. It's tuned. But these signals must match, right? One signal's coming from vision and the other's coming from the VOR, and they're both controlling the same eye muscles. So the same eye muscles have to be controlled from both. You can screw this up by putting prism glasses on, and then you kind of go for a while. So there's a gain here that has to be tuned. Who tunes the gain? Well, of course, the cerebellum, because the cerebellum does practically all this kind of stuff, right? Using this auxiliary optical system. So now, this actually has almost all, now if you look at these boxes, you've got visual cortex and the cerebellum. You pretty much have like 95% of the neurons in your nervous system. So we've got this trade-off. Now in general, what happens is, in general, if you want stuff to be fast, you have to have reflexes for it. But that is inflexible. Your greatest flexibility comes from stuff you do in cortex, but it's slow. And then the cerebellum sits in the middle. And this is sort of like an operating system. It sits in the middle and runs all these things. And so we want to understand these kind of architectures. And then what this lets you do is it lets you tune to behave in fast and flexible ways in specific environments. But often we don't know what this is. And we're trying to reverse engineer this. And worse, biologists are trying to reverse engineer this without understanding this picture. And that's what we need to help them with. Okay. So what we see is we have distributed control, extremely heterogeneous delays. So what happens is you've got, so if we look at this picture, these are all communication channels. And we want to come back to what these are. This is a really important thing. Extremely heterogeneous delays. What do I mean by this? You've got this extremely, well, this is a slow 300 milliseconds, too slow for your head motion. So you have to have this other fast path in, and that's tens of milliseconds. But then you have to have it tuned, and that's hours to days. So you have, I don't know, 8 orders of magnitude in time scales just in that diagram alone. Okay. And so you need all this stuff, very heterogeneous. But this is a very common pattern. This combination of different kinds of feedback loops, and this is a feed-forward loop. E. coli have to have fast and flexible control of their response to heat shock. And so what do is they have the same pattern of feedback loops, implemented completely differently, of course, but the same sort of architecture. And this is 2005 paper in PNNL if you want to read about it. And so what you see is the same trade-off. If you want to be fast, you control things at the level of proteins, but the greatest flexibility is done through your ability to express different genes. So we've seen 2 examples of this kind of trade-off. What about this is universal, and what about this is domain-specific? Well, most of it's domain-specific, but there's a few things that are quite universal. Let's take another example. Computer technology. If you want stuff to be fast, you better have hardware. The greatest flexibility is in all this diverse application software, and the operating system is what ties it all together. This is the key. If you don't have this, you can't do these things as easily. And so what does this picture really mean? It means that if you want speed, you have to be out here. But if you want flexibility, you accept the slow here. But what's best of all is because of this, you can have both. right? So we want to understand that better. What is the most flexible source of control? Horizontal transfer, right? So here, we have a diversity of hardware, but have this enormous diversity of application software that we can just download, right? Just bewildering amount. So we can do also, so I'm calling that horizontal transfer, which means, oh, we got some font issues. Oh, well, that's okay. Hopefully it won't show up too much. So we can swap applications, provided we have shared operating systems. We can also do horizontal hardware transfer, but we don't change this. We have very few choices here. And you're either a Linux person or a Mac person or a Windows person, and you don't swap much, right? And you don't have much choice. Huge choices here. And this is a fairly universal thing. The internet has the same situation. We've had TCP/IP for decades. All of the rest of the stuff has completely changed. So this is how you accelerate evolvability. And of course, bacteria do it as well. Massive horizontal gene transfer, right? And here's a few of the numbers in E. coli. I'm not going to go through this, but just, there's the E. coli genome is bigger than ours. It's just that it's spread out in a pan-genome among a bunch of E. coli. Massive horizontal transfer. What's our most flexibility from our ability to exchange ideas? So meme transfer is our greatest evolvability. So we want to learn to, say, ride a bicycle. We talked about bicycles, right? Well, mostly you're going to probably get help from somebody else. You're going to do it very badly to begin with, but you're going to you can have somebody help you learn how to do that. If you had to do this completely on your own, it would take a lot longer, be a lot harder. Now, in principle, you could build a bike, but that's actually quite hard. So you're going to go and buy a bike or get a bike from somebody else. And so you do this horizontal transfer, and we horizontal transfer tools. I came in here, we just plug in, I put my PowerPoint on their computer, and it all just runs, right? But also, we have to use this whole system to learn. So if you want to get good at biking, you have to make most of it reflexes. You can't be doing it up in the planning stage. But you still, when you're an expert biker, you still use your cortex to plan where you go. But you don't have to worry about steering anymore. Okay. So what you see is this enormous diversity up here, a fair amount of diversity here. But if you went around the room, where are we most alike? We're most alike here. We all have different tools. We all have different ideas. But here, the operating system is all the same. Okay? Not diverse in the middle. And you see this all over the place. Huge diversity in all these systems. No diversity here. Transcription is translation is the operating system in the cell. It's exactly the same in every cell on the planet. Our OS is very little choice. The cerebellum is very little choice. Easily evolvable, but not here in the middle. You can't change this. This stuff hasn't changed for billions of years or decades, depending on the time scale you're interested in. Now, it is possible to actually do local invention. Occasionally, there are new mutations. Occasionally, people write new code. And apparently, occasionally, somebody actually has a new idea, I'm told. Anyway, at Caltech, we think we have lots of them, but anyway. But it doesn't work very well. I mean, usually they're bad, right? It's slow, incremental, and buggy, so we don't do it very often. But it's very rewarding if you can get it right. But it also relies on these OS-enabled mechanisms. Okay. So what's the danger in all this stuff is these viruses can come in and hijack the same thing. They can put their genes in or their memes in, right? Now, predators are very different. Predators don't care about the architecture. They just want the meat. So they're willing to destroy the architecture to get at the meat, and all this extra complexity they don't care about, right? But viruses hijack intact architectures. And particularly interesting is a class called the zombies, the zombie parasites. So there's this one particular parasite that gets into mice, and it needs to get into a cat to complete its life cycle. It's got to get into the cat. So what does it do? It makes mice like cats, right? And what happens to a mouse that likes cats? It becomes meat for the cat. And so, but think about that. A parasite takes over a mouse and basically leaves it unaffected, except it has the behavior that it now loves cats. That's insane, right? Okay. Unfortunately, humans are the same. So zombie parasites attack they hijack very complex behaviors. And so there's all sorts of zombie parasites. It's amazing. Everything you can imagine doing to an organism, some zombie parasite does it. And so, of course, zombies in science fiction are both predators and parasites. Probably the closest thing would be rabies, right? There is a virus that has to be transmitted here. But the behavior is changed in such a way that it aggressively uses the predatory nature of the organism to pass it along. But humans, both our greatest strength, but our greatest weakness is bad meme transfer, so sort of zombie memes. So the biggest problems humans have is they believe things that are false, unhealthy, and dangerous. Things like, masculinity and monotheism, which is a really bad combination. Now, there's layers within layers, right? So I'm taking a very simplified view of this. But there is a lot in common. We have this hourglass. A nice phrase is constraints to deconstrain. I like that. It's all digital at the top. That's something we should spend more time on, but we don't have time. Okay, but these systems are vastly more different than they are similar. But their similarities, I think, are really quite profound. In particular, they're all layered architectures. They all have these trade-offs, right? One of the things is evolvability is important, and they're enabled by this hourglass diversity. Okay. They use horizontal transfer, all of them. They create this tunable illusion of speed and flexibility when, in fact, none of the parts have that. The important stuff is all virtual and internal and hidden. If you didn't know the operating system was there, you wouldn't know that you even had one. Hijacking is one of the big issues, and robustness is important in all this stuff, and it's digital at the top. So these are all fairly universal. So what I've tried to give you a little feel for so far is that we have these universal laws that are relatively unknown in science, and actually not that well understood in engineering. We need to do a better job of education. We also have these universal architectures that have to deal with these laws. Okay. So, and we could go, I claim that these issues are involved in all of these large transitions. And I haven't worked out the details in all of them, but I'm trying to. So what's the theory of this architecture part? So we've seen some examples. I showed you some laws for this balancing, so I want to give you a little bit feel for what the theory of this looks like as I'm running out of time. As I told you, I have way too many slides. Okay, so here's the issues we have to deal with in a general theory. And this looks bewildering, and it probably is, but we're going to try to give you a little feel for this. So the general thing is that these systems are layered. We saw these layered architectures with this hourglass. We've got to have a theory of that. The low layers and the high layers are quite different, though. So there's some general features, and then there's special to low and high. So we want to kind of work our way through what this list is. So in general, we want to have dynamics and feedback. The most important nonlinearity is saturation. Things are digital and quantized. We got to worry about scale and sparsity. We've got to worry about the simultaneous design of the control system, the plant, the communications, the sensing and actuators, and other nonlinearities. All this stuff we've got to deal with. And we have to deal with the high layer and the low layer. So I want to try to, in the time we have left, I'm going to try to get as far as I can in working through how this works. Okay. So what are the high layers? Well, the high layers are about advanced warning. We're using vision to make plans. And if we have the time to plan, we can take initial errors that are enormous and get them to zero because we're very mobile, right? So this is this advanced planning warning stage, okay. And it's not just us. It's not just vision, and it's not just, moving large. Sometimes our high precision is at very small scales. But I can have a thread in LA and a needle here, and if I got a couple days, I can thread the needle, right? I take a flight, anyway. So on this side, if we have enough advanced warning, we can take enormous errors and drive them to zero. On the other side, is reflexes. We're dealing with disturbances that have happened in the past. Now, all of a sudden, it's completely opposite. Tiny perturbations can cause huge errors, right? All of a sudden, everything's turned around. But if this stuff doesn't work, if you can't get this stuff to work, it doesn't matter how good you are over here. You need both of them to work together. But they're extremely different, right? So let's see if we can understand this a little bit. So when we're in this situation, the lower level reflexes have virtualized away all the complexity. My balance is unstable, right? I've got to deal with this problem all the time. But I don't have to think about it. That's all done automatically at the lower levels of the reflexes, right? But the low layers have to deal with all this stuff. And once you've caught the prey, you still have the problem that you've got a situation where you have saturations. You're delayed, you're unstable, and you've got this worst case disturbance that you're dealing with. So you're kind of down here, and it's hard, right? And if you screw up just a little bit, you're dead. So at this point, somebody's going to die, right? And whoever's slowest is going to die. Slowest and weakest is going to die. And so we sort of saw this here. But see, we cheated a little bit, right? The delayed and unstable stuff that I'm doing is all unconscious and automatic. What I did is I made it conscious so that we could study it. But that's not what your visual system does, right? We kind of took a left-hand side issue and turned it into a right-hand side problem. That's a little artificial, but it let us reveal things. But in fact, we really need to think about these two as working together and working separately. So what we have is that we have this system that has to work well, to take enormous errors and drive them to zero. But then we still have to have this system work so that small perturbations don't kill us. Okay? And we need a theory of this. Okay. So, because everything over here is unstable. It's not just balance or posture. It's oxygen saturation, blood pressure, pH, infection, temperature, everything is unstable. Yet we live we function as if it's all easy and stable because we don't have to worry about it until something breaks, of course. Okay, so very different on this side and this side, and we need a theory that makes sense of that. Okay, so we need to start making some sense of that. So what I want to talk about a little bit is this world of the advanced planning and the world of this delayed, reflex, and unstable. So on the right, you need accuracy, and on the left, you need speed. And we talked about this over here. We had this picture where if we got slower, we would blow up. That's just this left side of the picture. We want to get this part in as well, the advanced planning. We want to see both sides of this. So I just made up a toy example, which is you and I are fencing, right? And it's a symmetric situation. Your delays are my advance, and my delays are your advance. So basically, if you're faster, then you get to, let's suppose I'm in slow motion, right, to compare to you, right? Then you're getting all sorts of advanced warning about what I'm going to do. So from my perspective, everything's happened in the past, and you win, right? But if we could turn it around the other way around, if I'm faster, then I'm living in the future. You look slow to me, and I'm going to win, right? Okay, so in that case, though, I don't succeed unless I have accuracy. So for this advanced warning part of the world, I need accuracy. Okay, so for example, now let me just think about this in a little more detail. It turns out we really need to look on log scales because if you do get me, then I've got some trauma, and now I have to coagulation, inflammation, regeneration on maybe days to even years to heal. However, if I can train and plan in advance, maybe I can avoid the trauma altogether. But that also takes years. So the time scales involved here are enormous. And I want a theory that makes sense of all of this. Okay, so that involves in learning. Okay, so that picture, that's what brains do. But our bodies were back over here with efficiency and robustness. And over here, we're talking about speed and accuracy. So we've got this high-dimensional trade-off space, and we want to connect these, right? And so we did this a little bit. I mean, we captured a little bit of this. We changed the length, and that mimicked the robustness efficiency trade-off. And then we said we could change the delay, and that would be over here. But we still haven't gotten this part of the picture in, and we need to do that. Okay, so what we're going to do, oh, by the way, I want to just mention a couple other places where we've done this already, which is mechanistic physiology. Here's an example, heart rate variability, PNAS last year, robust efficiency, and healthy heart rate controllability. We've got mechanistic explanations. It's in this style of this. We found laws, all this sort of thing in architectures. Another example is glycolytic oscillations, robust efficiency. This appeared in Science in 2011. This is another advertisement. Again, go read this paper. Okay. All these systems have this efficiency but instability. So for example, I don't want to spend too much time on this. But what this creates is this opportunity for new kinds of crashes. So once we have weapons and we can walk around, right, we're now the top predator. But we have a new vulnerability, which is if we get caught without our weapons, we're just meat. Unlike the chimps, we're too weak to fight off a predator. But more interestingly, we have a whole new class of warfare. Chimps have warfare, but humans have warfare that are because of our weapons and everything and planning. But in addition, we can cause mass extinction. So as humans radiate around the globe, we just killed everything, basically. And we're still doing that. So these are crash backs, but these are crash forwards. They're crashed into a totally new scenario, and they're often much worse than the crash backs. Another example is when we had agriculture. Agriculture plus weapons, what did it produce? Well, it produced a possibility of famine, a backward crash, but the forward crash was slavery. All agricultural states were slave states, started out as slave states. And we're working hard to reproduce that here in this country right now. What's interesting is the crashes backwards hurt everyone, but the crashes forward benefit those that create the crash. Does that sound familiar? And a systematic study of this is missing. And so this is one of the things I want to, again, kind of make sense of. Okay, I got to hurry up here because we're running out of time. Okay, so we talked about this mechanism. What I want to try to do is flip the axes around because I want to have fast here and kind of errors on this axis. So I just flip these axes around. I hope that doesn't bother you because I need this down here. So what we did is, in some sense, we made this connection, right? We had this environmental system behavior, which we talked about with the fencing or with the predatory and stuff. And then we had these components down here. And we're able to say, okay, this is here because we need speed. We need reflexes. And this is here because we need high precision, high accuracy, and advanced warning and planning. Okay? And so now we're going to try to make some sense of this. We're going to look at both our triumphs and our failures, or our fragilities. And we're going to now bring in the nerve level. In what little time? Oh, God, I'm going to have to really... Okay, I'm going to go really fast. So I have online videos that go in this in really detail. I'm going to try to give you a flavor for what the issues are. So what we want to do is we want to look at how metabolism constrains the nervous system, and then how that constrains behavior. Okay, so we're going to... And what I mean by... So when we looked at behavior, we were talking about hours and days and milliseconds and huge time ranges. We got also extreme component level heterogeneity here. What I mean here, what I plotted here is I've looked at a few nerves, and I've looked at their axon diameters versus the number of axons per nerve. And you can see it's a huge variation, right? So cranial nerves, the optic nerve. Optic nerve has 1 million axons, and they're about a micron in size. There's some spread, but I'm going to ignore that for the second. We're thinking it's homogeneous. It's not homogeneous. The olfactory nerve, on the other hand, has 6 million axons, but they're a lot smaller and slower. And then the vestibular guy, there's only 20,000 of those, but they're big. And then auditory sits in here, and then the sciatic nerve, sciatic, this thing that hurts sometimes, that's really big. Has really big axons, but not very many of them. And there's even some in the periphery, A-alphas, that are huge, and there's only a few. Okay, so that's the picture. 6 orders of magnitude here, right? Huge. Why? What's this? What's going on here? So we have this extreme component level heterogeneity, and we want to connect this up with mechanistic physiology and close this loop back to behavior and performance. We want to put this all together. And so we've done that, first cut, And I'm going to try to give you a little bit of flavor, but you're going to have to watch the videos. Okay, so this is my student Yori Nakahira's work. And we saw these heterogeneous delays in this system. And what's really going on, actually, we talked about this picture. It's not really noisy. Your eye isn't noisy. It's quantized. So you have low resolution, particularly in the periphery. It's not noisy. If you look at the system and you go back and look at it again, it looks the same. It's just got errors in it. Okay. So we want to put that in the picture. So what we're going to look at is models where we have computing elements, which is gray matter, and then we've got delayed and quantized communication. Okay, so when I draw these arrows, and we're going to draw some block diagrams like that. So what do we think of as a nerve? These arrows in here are a nerve. What's a nerve? A nerve has got a bunch of axons in it, these little guys, lots of them, and all sorts of supportive tissue. Okay, and so what's expensive about a nerve? Well, basically everything scales by the area. So the cross-sectional area is how much it costs to make and maintain the nerve. So the basic unit of cost is the cross-sectional area. So we're going to call that alpha. And then we can just look at the physiology and we know what the lengths and areas are. The question is, why are they composed the way they are? That's the question we want to ask. And so we see is this extreme heterogeneity. And this is they're all about the same area. So each of these guys has about the same area. So they're about the same cost. But they're extremely different in their composition. And we want to explain that difference, this heterogeneity, and connect it to the extreme heterogeneity we see in the behavior of the organism. Okay? So we can have cheap or expensive, but if we have the same, then we can either go with a few big axons or a lot of little ones. That's the trade-off. Okay? So you can't be out here, that's too big. Okay, so now we have to make sense of the trade-off involved here. What is the main trade-off? Well, let's suppose we're going to fix the nerve area at some area. And that's n times pi rho squared, where n is the number of axons and rho is the axon radius. Okay, that's just a little geometry. And so one of the important things is delay. We've said delay, delay, delay. So what's an important delay? Delay is propagation. How long does it take an action potential to propagate? What's its speed? Well, that scales with the radius. Okay, the speed scales with the radius. So the delay scales like 1 over the radius. Okay. But the spiking rate, which is boom, 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 how fast can you generate the spikes? So there's the propagation speed, and then there's the rate of spiking. Okay? That also scales with the radius. Okay? So the bandwidth scales like n times rho, where the n is the number of bits, and rho is the spiking rate. So you have two things now, the bandwidth and we have the delay. How do they relate? Well, this is work that I've kind of started with Terry Szymanowski and Simon Laughlin, who are sort of the experts on this. So we're really looking at spiking neurons as a digital packet switch network. Now, you could take issue with that, and that would tweak the model some. But this is a basic starting point. And this is actually not bad for the big stuff. Okay, so now what we can do is we can do a little math. N is alpha over rho squared. And that means that R scales like alpha over rho, right? But delay scales like 1 over rho, so R scales like the area times the delay. And so we can say that the bandwidth scales like some constant times the delay, where that constant depends on area. And if the area is fixed, then we can just think of this as a fixed relationship. Okay? Now that went awfully fast, and you could challenge every bit of it, and you should. So, damn. Okay, let me go through this. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through this like ridiculously fast. And all I'm going to try to do is give you a feel for what the elements of the theory are. And not a fast enough. And so this is just hopefully you'll go watch the videos. And I apologize. It's just too much material. Okay, we've got to change this picture to bandwidth versus delay, which is easy to do. Bunch of little algebra, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then we're going to flip the axes. So what we want to be is we want to be accurate and fast. We can't be both. So this is a trade-off that we got from the nerve level. Okay. So that's the trade-off that we get from this. And we see that the expensive parts of the nervous system kind of line up, right? Okay. So, okay, I'm going to skip this. So let me just tell you what the idea behind the model is. So what we got to do is we've got to get a model that puts delays in, has performance, all this kind of stuff in it. And it has to have all these pieces, and we can put all these elements in it. And, okay, I'm going to skip ahead to the punchline. A lot of math, okay. But it's actually not hard. It's not hard math. And it's all in the videos very slowly. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I'm going to get to the punchline.
It's almost like a video now.
Yeah, it's almost like a video. Okay, so, okay. So, here it is. Okay. So what we get is we get this mathematical model that connects this picture with this behavior, and it fits perfectly in that the high resolution optical factory systems, which is the slow, high res stuff, exactly fits this behavior. And so what we had to make is that all that stuff that I didn't show you is a model of this environment behavior. And then the fast stuff, this vestibular system, the sciatic nerves, and the spinal systems, they correspond to this part. And there's actually theorems. I mean, so this picture comes out of a theorem. And I'm not telling you all the details, but it exactly fits the story. So it perfectly connects the constraints on the nervous system in terms of bandwidth and delay with this, which is extremely heterogeneous, orders of magnitude in bandwidth in the nervous system, with these extreme differences we see in behavior, whether you have advanced warning or whether you reflectively react to stuff. So I hope you'll go. None of this is published yet, though. I don't have papers on this, but I'm not worried about anybody stealing this. I'm just worried about, will anybody understand a word of it, right? But it turns out the math is not that hard, and it fits in this general picture. There's architecture here. There's laws here that connect these two, and the things that connect these things are laws. They're like gravity, like anything else, and if you don't understand them, you can't make sense of this. And so the hope is that this is now a very first baby step in creating really a good layered architecture. So the final thing is, okay, we didn't do this very well, and we didn't get any of these issues in, even in what I said so far. So we have a whole big theory, and this is my student Nikolai Montney, which says, okay, let's go from these toys to scalable issues. Big scalable systems, lots of boxes, lots of wires, lots of disturbances. And that works too. We've made huge progress on that. So that combination we're hoping to put together to do really a systematic study of how brains work at scale. And it turns out this is the same theory we're using to try to design the next generation internet architecture, because all these same issues are there, right? We need all of these issues, and cyber-physical and the grid, eventually we're going to need these things. And so we have all these issues, and fortunately, I think we now have a first cut of a theory. So hopefully you got a sense of the kind of questions I'm asking, if not how I'm answering them. And the questions are different enough that it wouldn't have made any sense for me to try to do this until I explained to you. So I didn't know what to do with the hour, but did my best. So hopefully it's a trailer for the videos.
So we have a few minutes for some questions here, both from those in the audience and perhaps online or through the chat boxes. So let me see if there's any questions here. Over here first.
Hi, so you pointed out that you have a fundamental difference between fast, slow, high speed, low speed. A lot of the examples you indicated, the fast speed is also much more efficient. So the system 1 versus system 2 in the brain, hardware calculations versus calculations done in software. Are there fundamental energetic scaling differences, similar to metabolic scaling or scaling in city size versus GDP, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, yes and no. So in this context, let's go back to the nervous system. More or less, all of those nerves, which are incredibly different, cost the same. So again, it's very roughly, but it's roughly the same expense to have the vestibular nerve as it is to have the optic nerve. But the optic nerve is slow and the vestibular nerve is fast. So I don't think, once you've devoted a certain amount of resources to the computing and the communication and the control, you can then dial that into either being high bandwidth or fast. And those are opposite. I think the reason there's been a lot of confusion about this, because almost all the theories that have attempted to do this don't have delay in them at all. Delay isn't ever mentioned. And if you don't get delay in the picture, you don't get the right trade-off between bandwidth and delay, and so you get very confused. So I do think there is, for the organism as a whole, the big trade-off is robustness versus efficiency. But each of those dimensions, robustness has many dimensions. I can be robust by being a tortoise with a big shell, or I can be robust by being, fast and nimble. So there isn't one kind of robustness, and there isn't one kind of efficiency, right? And so the problem is these are high-dimensional problems, but I can show two-dimensional pictures on PowerPoint. So you project them, and fortunately, these have usually a few principal components that dominate the design trade-offs. But you have to chop the problem up. You have to first do metabolism, and then you have to step over and do the nervous system, and then you have to kind of go back and forth. So, and I'm not even sure this is the right way to split it all up. This is kind of a first cut, and sometimes the only person working on this. I mean, the other people that work on like this tend not to think about the delay, tend not to think about this distinction between the world of advanced planning and the world of robustness to disturbance that have occurred in the past. So almost none of that is useful to me at this point. So all this stuff about allometric scaling, all this kind of stuff, useless. To me. Yeah, to me.
All right.
So
time for one last question.
It's not even right, so that's another issue. But
one other question. Any other questions online or right here?
Yeah, so one thing that was kind of a way of tuning your efficiency and robustness is by choosing a good environment. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah, so and that's a really subtle issue that I'm just starting to get my head around a little bit, which is it's that we tune ourselves the environment. So this 10,000 hours thing, which is popular now, but the point is, if you want to get good at something, whether it's chess or riding a bicycle or math or anything, what you've got to do is you've got to distribute it appropriately across the architecture. So typically you start out doing everything in cortex, slowly, badly. And if you are capable of doing the task well, it is because you can learn to move the capabilities down into the system in the appropriate location. Now, a chimp can't learn to run and throw. So you will never have a chimp quarterback in the NFL, right? Because they don't run well and they can't throw at all. Like the best chimp fastball is like 30 miles an hour, right? That wouldn't get you in 10-year-old little league, right? So chimp can't do that. And we're like terrible at chess, right? Just because we can't look very far ahead. We didn't think we were terrible in chess till the computers started beating the crap out of us. So the stuff we're really good at is like reaching into your pocket and finding a quarter, or threading a needle, and which robots can't do at all well. So you've got to have the basic hardware capability. But then these kinds of architectures give you tremendous flexibility in how you deploy that in a given environment. But you still have to have it matched to the environment. And so I think that problem, that issue of evolvability of the hardware on slower time scales, the evolvability of these meme or gene-based systems on shorter time scales, that's a question I'm just starting to try to understand. But I think at least this is, for the first time, the right framework to even think about that. So, and I hope Darwin and Turing would approve, because it's a combination of their thinking. It's Darwin about evolution, and don't underestimate how clever evolution can be. And then Turing's thinking about architecture and delay. So,
Please join me in thanking Dr. Doyle once again. And before we adjourn to the reception, we do have a small memento of your time.
okay.
Here. I'd like to present you with this.
Aha, okay.
Right? You can carry that in the airplane, or we can ship it to you as you prefer.
I think ship.
There we go. All right. There was not much delay in that answer. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank all of you and those watching online for taking the time to join us in this lecture. Please, if you have time, join us in the foyer for some refreshments and for the reception. Thank you very much.